He seemed like nothing more than a throwaway joke character, and a hated one to boot. With the same kind of vibe as Zenitsu, Gurimu Igarashi ranks last in the 300 players within Blue Lock, aiming to become the greatest striker in the world. He's surrounded by players with the speed needed to blitz past half a team, the skill capable of scoring otherworldly goals, and the foresight to control the entire pitch. But Igaguri, as he's called, had nothing, leading many fans to question how and why he made it as far as he did. Because as someone clearly incapable of becoming the best, why was he in a project aimed at producing exactly that? And yet the irony of the fanbase's hatred towards him is that he's all of us. The overwhelming majority of us, by definition, simply don't have some sort of world-class talent. And yet, we all want to push on for what's best for us. Igaguri's case, it's to escape his miserable home life, and the fate that awaits him there of a lifetime as a monk. And I have a 22-minute video on this, so I'm going to go through the next parts pretty quickly, just to give some context for anyone who's not seen Blue Lock before we go on to the newest chapter. But I didn't think anything of Igaguri for the first 240 chapters of the manga. But in 241, he essentially admits his embarrassment at the situation, that he's not aiming for number one, but just to escape the family temple. And he feels ashamed of that, because he's surrounded by players that will essentially become the stars of the next generation. But when he finally gets subbed on, after spending over 150 chapters by this point, without even playing in a game, he doesn't let his chance go to waste. Having secretly built up his own technique behind the scenes, the Mallica technique, which is essentially just drawing fouls, he stops Blue Lock's rank 1 not just once, but twice, when no one else could. Which, I'm not a football expert or anything, but I'm told this is a very different thing to diving, although it's not something you ever really see in defense. But despite that, fans hated him for this. If people were threatening to drop the manga, this was not the moment Igaguri gained everyone's respect. It's obviously not a weapon that one would be proud of, even though it probably does actually take a ton of skill, but it's all Igaguri had. He had to throw away that sense of pride. He had to stop caring about whether he looks lame and look for whatever he could to fight back. With no strength, speed or technique, the Mallica technique was all he found. And obviously, it's not enough to become a world-class player. You know, a few chapters later, after the other team figures out his gimmick, he's substituted off and eliminated following this match. But crucially, he gets a 3 million yen professional offer. So just for anyone who hasn't seen Blue Lock, essentially everyone there played 4 matches which were televised to the world, where they kind of merged with these professional U20 teams, and clubs around the world would bid for the players, and those bids formed the rankings with the top 23 surviving. Whilst he may have ranked last, he won. He achieved this dream. He would no longer have to work at the temple. But eliminated alongside him was Nagi Seishiro. Initially ranked second, he fell all the way to 24th in spite of his inhuman talent, because he couldn't get himself fired up. Essentially, he had that feeling of, I know I need to be doing this, but just couldn't bring himself to do so. And again, I've yapped about this a ton in other videos, but Igaguri went out of his way to find him once they returned to their normal lives, resulting in the chapter that changed the world's opinion on him. The two players are the complete opposites of each other. You know, one has all the talent in the world, but zero motivation. The other has this relentless drive, but zero talent, or zero talent relative to Blue Lock. You know, he was obviously still selected as part of the top 300 strikers, but anyway. Nagi has no clear goal whatsoever, and felt no real repercussions for losing until it happened, whereas Igaguri had a crystal clear vision of, if I get an offer, I win, I can go pro. If I don't, I lose. I'll spend a life at the temple. He fought both to escape the looming threat behind him and chase the dazzling dream in front of him. So when the two were eliminated, at the end of it all, Nagi felt nothing. At the time, at least, he would later on realize how much he missed Blue Lock, but Igaguri felt frustrated yet satisfied. He achieved this dream, and having that confirmation that he was indeed satisfied was a really nice touch in this chapter. But the question is, why is he even here? He says that it's because he wants to tell Nagi to keep playing football, as when Nagi was walking off after being eliminated, it seemed like he was pretty done with the sport. Interestingly, this panel of him and Rio is extremely similar to Isuki and Igaguri when he was subbed off, both knowing it was the end of their time at Blue Lock. But what's even more interesting is when Nagi admits he's not made up his mind on football yet, Igaguri says that he hasn't either. But what could actually be left for him to figure out? He's got his pro offer, and we know that he wants to do that. All that's left for him now is to decide if he wants to go further. As he says, there are no limits to dreams, only the size of their scale. He says that his dream of going pro was big enough for him to wager his life, but not enough to become the world's best. And so, I left Blue Lock satisfied. Whereas Nagi definitely isn't satisfied, despite not really having a clear picture of what he wants, besides getting fired up again and believing Blue Lock to be the only place that would happen. But he claims there are sometimes things you need to give up on, even if you're not satisfied. I'll come back to that in a moment, but unbeknownst to Igaguri, Nagi does have a way back to Blue Lock. A shady secret deal with the devil for a spot on the team, one where he sacrifices all his freedom to the control of a greedy old man. But he gets exactly what he wants. Yet he turns it down. Not out of consideration for that last clause, that doesn't even seem to really register for him, but instead out of some vague idea of not betraying Blue Lock. Not betraying Blue Lock, not wanting to look lame to Rio and Isuki, which are very obviously just him hiding from his reality. They're kind of an excuse for his self-pity. And this makes Igaguri absolutely furious. You know, the man who'd had to put the idea of worrying about whether he looks lame aside long ago. And in Blue Lock's recent arcs, a lot of the players' biggest jumps in effectiveness have come from them not caring about certain things anymore, about discarding all desires but one. And after fighting that way for so long, to see someone holding himself back because of such nonsense is infuriating for Igaguri. If you're gonna quit your dream based on what others think, then just give it up. It won't come true anyway. Why was it you and not me? If I had your talent, I'd still try to be the world's best, even if it was painful and lame. And I think it's clear by this point that there's still a part of Igaguri that wishes he was still in Blue Lock. You know, he's satisfied with where he is, sure, but of course, that little part of him still wishes he made it through. And this is something that's really tough to deal with. Achieving something great and feeling satisfied with it, even when you know there's several levels above that. He's got every reason to be happy, but it's still quite hard to push aside that small part of you that says otherwise. Of course, his line about doing whatever it takes, even if it's painful and lame, perfectly captures his spirit throughout Blue Lock. He fought like a man with his life on the line, tossing aside anything except survival, no matter how shameful it may be. It's also the complete opposite of what Nagi said in his introduction chapter, that weak guys who have to try hard to win are such a pain, I'd rather give up. I think a lot of people realize after this chapter that Igaguri has always been the symbol of the average guy doing the best he can. But I want to end this video focusing on this page here, where he talks about how he knew the consequences for both his victory and defeat, but Nagi has neither. He doesn't know what he wants to win or what will happen if he loses. Whilst I'm aware this is oversimplifying things a lot, I think this is at the crux of Nagi's issues and a lot of ours as well. The same way a lot of us don't really have a clue what we want, besides maybe some vague ideas we saw online. Nagi was just kind of dragged along with Rio's dream of winning the World Cup, but never actually seemed to care much for it. His only real fear being losing the fire he's found, but otherwise remains completely apathetic. And evidently, it can't have been that scary for him, because it never really managed to push him to do much at all. And I think this is in part because in the back of his mind, he knows he'll still have a comfortable life outside of Blue Lock, Given that he's at the same school as Ryo, he's definitely going to be able to get a great career if he wants it. Bara, interestingly, said something similar in his awakening, that he needs an equal amount of despair, that just having this cushy environment where everything is always fine isn't going to get him fired up. And this, of course, is the difference between Nagi and Igaguri, who, as mentioned earlier, has a crystal clear idea of what will happen if he loses. And that's what gives him the ability to push aside all the pointless nonsense that's dragging Nagi down right now. Of course, this is extremely similar to Isagi's latest power-up in selling his soul for victory, because his hunger to win was greater than anything else. The point Blue Lock seems to be zeroing in on is that everyone inevitably reaches a limit of how far they can go without narrowing down to a single desire, and no one embodies that idea more than Igaguri. I do have a much longer video going into more detail on this, so I won't just repeat all the points from there here, but I just wanted to put a quick one out for my favourite character returning. Shout out to my Patreon and channel members, and I'll see you all again soon.